The idea is very simple. If you are the few and you want to control the many, you have to centralize decision making. You have to centralize power. The more points of decision making you have, the more diversity of decision making, the less power any small cabal is going to have at the center. What the European Union is, and of course they have plans for similar structures all over the world, like they've got the African Union, they want the North American Union to be the American Union, they want the Asia-Pacific Union, but the European Union is the blueprint. And this was the next stage where they started bringing the nations together under centralized control. So now a few literal bureaucrats in Brussels are dictating to the nations of Europe. The next stage from that is a world government which would dictate to the unions. What we'll do is we'll keep incessantly moving towards that and give an economic excuse for why the different stages of more and more centralization are justified until, as you put it, you basically pass a point where there's no return. And in effect, barring a colossal revolution, we are, in the present state of things anyway, past the point of no return. And it's just been a classic case of what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, where you start at A, you know you're going to Z, but you know if you go in gigantic leaps, then the change is so dramatic and quick that people look up and ask what's going on. So you make your leaps as much as you can get away with, but not so far that there's a big kind of reaction and acknowledgement that something very different is going on here. And they've done it brilliantly. But the way they played it in more recent times is to deny the public an opportunity to have a decision or make a decision in referendums, etc., on the incessant centralization of power that we've been seeing, because more and more people are beginning, in fact, well past beginning, to look at the European Union, the way it's going, and feel great unease about it. We saw this with the no votes for the Constitution in the Netherlands and in France, and that was a big wake-up call to the manipulators, because they realized that if you give people the opportunity to say yes or no to this creation of this United States of Europe, then overwhelmingly you're going to get a no. That is why they simply changed the name of the Constitution to the treaty and kept 98% or something of the Constitution in the treaty. It was an excuse, clearly, blatantly, obviously, not to have a rerun of the French and Dutch referendums, because they knew they would say no again, and not to have to give a referendum in the UK where we would have massively said no, no question. The arrogance and the agenda of this cabal is such that public opinion is totally and utterly irrelevant. And if public opinion is going to say what you don't want it to say, then you do not give public opinion the chance to say it. In Ireland, of course, thanks to the Irish Constitution, they had to have a referendum on this treaty. And the Irish said no. What happens then is we can't call it something else, so we've got to get the Irish to turn over that decision. To be honest, if that vote had not been genuinely no, and some people think it wasn't, then they would have made it so by manipulating the votes anyway, and manipulating the count, because these people will not take no for an answer. So what we now have is a situation, outrageously, where a group of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, appointed by other bureaucrats, controlled by the elite family network, are now going to decide on the policy and the structure of European society. And you people in Ireland, good on you who voted no, but you voted yes. Young people, I'm afraid the celebrations are going to be very short. Because you know what the Irish have done, those that voted yes? They've voted to never have the option of voting again. Because what this means is, from now on, with the changes in the structure, we have literally a European government that has almost total power. And it's a very good analogy, because what you're looking at is, in all areas of human activity, the do's and don'ts are coming closer and closer, becoming more and more fine detail. And the point is to tangle you to the web like a fly to the web, so you can't move. And of course, ludicrously detailed bureaucracy is part of that. They explode these words and clauses and sub-clauses across pages and pages and pages of legislation. And the politicians who vote for it have never read it. Parties, a political version of the European Union. I guess if you look at its structure, you've now got a group of people who are answerable to a leader. And the leader then, and the leadership, and those in the shadows behind the leadership, dictate how all the people in that party, in a so-called democratic free country, are going to vote in relation to some legislation or other. And then there's the carrot and the stick, that if there's rebels who will not vote as the leadership says, then they know that their political careers in terms of rising up the ranks is going to be severely curtailed. Because they know that, the politicians in the party who are there for power, there for prestige, they're not there through values, they will toe the party line and vote for legislation they've not read, and even if they did, they didn't agree with, but they'll vote for it anyway. That we have this ludicrous idea that we live in a free country because of a democracy, as if freedom and democracy is the same thing, when actually the whole thing is stitched up so that people vote in the desired manner. And the Bilderberg Group is very, very important in the creation and the centralization of power within the European Union. For people who are new to these organizations, what they are is coordinating networks to coordinate a common policy, a common view among different countries, different people in banks, people in government, people in NATO, people in intelligence agencies. It's to create a coordination of view and of policy. And the Bilderberg Group has been one of the prime manipulators of the policy of of centralization of power in Europe. It's been from 1954, one of its prime motives has been to create the European Union as we now have. And it's very obvious and blatant that what we're seeing now was planned from the start. You know, we have a situation where Russian dissidents who've come out of the old Soviet Union are describing the European Union, quite rightly, as a mirror in structure of the Soviet Union with the Politburo, etc. And some of them, one of them in particular, tells the story of having seen reports or official reports of a meeting that Mikhail Gorbachev had when he was the leader of the Soviet Union, with David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger from the Trilateral Commission and Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, where in the middle of the conversation, d'Estaing said, Mr. President, this is what's going to happen within a certain number of years. In other words, what's happening now with the Treaty of Lisbon, the Lisbon Treaty, is going to happen in Europe, and it's going to happen in this period of years. So basically, you better get used to it. Now, what's interesting is two things. First of all, if France and the Netherlands had not voted no to the original constitution, then d'Estaing's timescale would have been virtually exact what he said, the number of years hence that this was going to come in. It's only been delayed because of those referendums, which meant they had to go through the process of going from a constitution to a treaty and all the rest of it. The other interesting thing is the person who oversaw the writing of the constitution was Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. So, Bilderberg Group, by the way. And the idea is to break the countries of Europe up into regions, because the idea is to de-unify any unification of response to the edifice of power above. So what we're seeing, not just in Europe, but blatantly in Europe, is the bringing down of borders. For what? For what reason? Same in America, it's happening. So that people from other cultures can pour into other cultures, and people from this culture can pour into that culture. Now, on the face of it, people might say, and I might agree with them, well, you know, we're all kind of just human beings. But if we're going to be streetwise, we need to understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening. And why it's happening on one key level is the plan is to destroy any sense of nation, any sense of unique culture. And this is all part of destroying a sense of uniqueness in any way. So you've got this great blob mentality that we call Europe. And, you know, if you've got a real strong sense of nation, this is why they're doing the same game big time on the United States, which at one point had a massive sense of nation and what it was. If you've got a sense of nation, then when things are suggested that break your nation up into regions, that take your ability to govern yourselves to an outside agency, if you've got a sense of nationhood, we're American, we're British, we're not having this, break that up, people go much more quietly. And that's the idea. They want to, and the other interesting thing is some of the maps that have come to light that have been in British newspapers from time to time over the years, they don't just turn Britain into a series of regions, but they take this region of Britain and they clump it together in a regional group with a region in France and a region in Scandinavia. Again, all deunifying. So the only unified force in the entire structure are the bureaucrats sitting around a table at the centre. That's the idea. And it's being done mercilessly and has been unfolding for decades because the blueprint was there right from the start.
A ruthless human being is more easily controlled. It's easy as that. Although everyone might not identify, as I say, with their nation or with their culture even, that is at least one fundamental point in many people's lives, and when they take that away, then it's much easier to control that human being, obviously.
Exactly, that's the idea. And we're actually seeing, Henrik, almost a cycle being completed now, because there was a point where people were rebelling against overt in-your-face dictatorship, i.e. royal diktat, kings and queens dictating everything. They rebelled about that, and that this was a problem for the control system, the emerging control system. So they had to start to do it another way, and they did it by moving these elite bloodlines, although they kept some in the royal families like we have in Britain, etc. But most of them went into what I call the dark suit professions and introduced this thing called democracy. And they had politicians which appeared to be voting in relation to what people wanted, and they were being elected by people. And then you had the corporations, and you had all these other things, all these dark suit professions of this cabal, and their agents and gophers were running this system. And for a long time, they ran it because they had to, as if people were free, and they equated freedom with democracy, which is just dictatorship by the majority, or even dictatorship by the minority in many countries. And people bought that. But what we're now seeing is the movement getting ever faster to the point where people are beginning to see again, as you know from your program, and I know from traveling the world and talking and researching this, more and more people are beginning to see again, actually, we're being controlled. It's almost like it's a return to, we're not having kings and queens dictating to us just because of their bloodline. And now people are starting to realize, hold on a second, in a different form, that's happening. And so we're seeing the European Union and all these other institutions of power becoming more and more blatant in the fact that that's what they are, dictatorships. And so this Rubicon that's been crossed with this Lisbon Treaty is going to take us into an era very, very soon where vast numbers of people will realize, actually, we're seeing another version of what humanity rejected centuries ago, which is the overt dictatorship by the few of the many. How we respond to that will decide how long it goes on for.